Hello everybody, Jake your resident content cowboy here. Yeehaw, it's Monday. On Mondays we do tier lists, and on Wednesdays we wear pink.
Together we run a no-nonsense office.
This is going to be our hyper voltage tier list. We recently had some kind of big changes to the meta. We have a lot of things that are still really relevant. Let's take a look at our tiers for this week. We have our God tier. We're only going to put one Pokemon in our God tier. We're not frickin' Norse around here. This is a Pokemon that I feel like is making huge waves in a meta. Scorching waves. We have our S tier. These Pokemon are crazy good. We have our A+ tier. Really a cut above the rest, even though I do feel like a lot of the meta is very solid. I want to highlight some Pokemon in our A+ tier. A tier, great picks, oftentimes not banned, also in draft. We've got our B tier. Still got the B tier. These are for Pokemon that are pretty good, decent choices. We've got our C tier, our Charizard tier, a tier named after Char because it was there for so long. Char is no longer there, but these are Pokemon that are all kind of a little underwhelming. Then we have our Decidueye Memorial tier. These are the worst Pokemon in the game, or at least Pokemon that I want to highlight as being sort of forgotten for a long time. A tier named after Decidueye upon release because Decidueye was so bad. Decidueye and Charizard no longer hang out in their tiers. How fun is that? This tier list is going to be based on solo, duo, trio, and a little bit of 5-stack play. This is outside of competitive play because that has a very specific sort of meta that could really be defined by how good a player is on a particular Pokemon at times, like see Dragonite and stuff like that for some of the Japanese teams. But in general, this is what the game feels like for almost everyone playing it, and this is where all of the Pokemon shake out right now before Armor Rouge releases in a few days. Let's get into it. I want to start with attackers, and the reason I want to start with attackers is, well, there's a few things. First off, the Greninja Battle Pass made Greninja like pretty exciting right now, and at the same time, I kind of want to illustrate what I do with my tier list so you have a good idea of what exactly you'd be looking at when you see a particular Pokemon in a particular tier. Where are you, Dragapult? Am I absolutely blind? There you are, buddy. So what I'd like to do in general is I kind of like to compare apples to apples, right? So when we're looking at these 5 Pokemon right here, Greninja, Cinderace, Decidueye, Duraludon, and Dragapult, I'm talking generally about all of them as sort of this auto attack role. They're all different. They all provide other, points of value, but they're all sort of A pressers, right? So let's say for the sake of conversation that I had Dragapult in the S tier. They're not. And I had something like Sylveon in the A+ tier. Honestly, they might be. That's not really saying I'm directly comparing these two all the time. I'm kind of trying to compare Dragapult to the rest of this crew and Sylveon to the rest of the Pokemon that are like it. However, in general though, I'm going to put Pokemon where I think they fall, if that sort of makes sense. So when you see a defender really high, it's because as a defender they're incredible, even though they might not be as powerful as Blaziken or something like that. So where to begin? Let's start with Greninja. I actually think Greninja's doing really well. I think A tier is a very fair place to put this Pokemon. I love the buffs they gave Greninja. Lower Unite move cooldown I think is amazing. It already was having a decent time with Water Shuriken. I think the smoke screen buff just helps a little bit for getting up extra damage on the boosted, right? So in general, I loved the Greninja change, and I think A is pretty fair for it. Cinderace I feel like is a little bit below Greninja. It's not terrible. It's still an okay A presser. It rips objectives. It has a decent secure. It's not really a competitive Pokemon, but at the same time, this isn't a Pokemon, this isn't a Pokemon tier list set up to start playing in the Unite Championship Series, which actually starts up in like a couple months this year. Decidueye. I think Decidueye is equal parts A tier and D tier at times, but it's really just based on the player and kind of based on the comp sometimes. The easiest Pokemon to punish, but extremely powerful, especially at range. And by at range, I mean at extreme range with Snipe Shot, right? I think that build is just still very strong, but you run into situations where you have less agency over whether or not you're winning. Because of that, I could see Decidueye kind of dropping down to maybe the top of the B tier here. It's pretty solid, but it's kind of fair to be in this realm. Duraludon, I think, is being slept on a little bit with the Flash Cannon build. I'm not exactly sure how the recent bug fix has messed with it. I'm going to put it down into our B tier just because if I am comparing it to Greninja, I think it's a little worse than Greninja, maybe a little better than Cinderace, but it's a really specific build, and truly there are a lot of people that do not like playing this style of Duraludon, so I kind of understand why it doesn't get a lot of love. And then we have Dragapult. Dragapult's probably low A. I think it's worse than Greninja, and if you wanted to put it down in the B tier with the rest of these Pokemon, I wouldn't argue with it too much. I've had Decidueye a little higher recently on my tier lists, but I do have to recognize that there's so many things that dive on it and really make its life miserable that unless your team composition is good or you're a phenomenal Decidueye player, it's kind of middle of the road. I would say kind of the same thing for Dragapult. If I were to have to rank them all, I'd probably put these ADCs in the B tier, and then Greninja I think is a little bit above the rest. I don't think any of these are bad. I think they're all fine with Greninja being a little bit better. Let's move on to some more attackers. I talked about Sylveon a minute ago. Let's start getting some of our special attackers out here, and we can talk about them. There's Sylvie, Venusaur, Cram, Alolan Ninetales, Pikachu, Gardevoir. Who else do we got that we're missing here? We're missing Espeon, Glaceon, Delphox. So many special attackers. Mew. We're missing Candle. We're missing Inteleon. And we're also missing Mewtwo Y, which is kind of a hybrid of these auto attackers and, you know, these special attackers. I'm sure we're missing something else. There's just so many Pokemon in the game. But let's start going through them. Sylveon. I think Sylveon's great. I'm going to put Sylveon A+ tier, and it might even be close to S. I think Hyper Voice is better than it was before, and it's kind of devastating to an enemy team. And I think Mystical Fire, Draining Kiss with the buffs to Draining Kiss, even better than before. Sylveon's really good. I expect to see this Pokemon played competitively as well. Really, really strong right now. Venusaur, I think, is good. It's probably A tier. It's like A, maybe high B, but I'd say it's probably A. You could still get a lot of value out of the Solar Beam build, and even Petal Dance works pretty well. So I would say A is pretty fair. Cramorant, I would say, is A+. Cram is just so good. The insane mobility of this Pokemon, the better secure you have with Hurricane now, even after its Unite move nerfs, I think it's still doing pretty good. Alolan Ninetales feels like a solid B tier choice to me. It is strong. Blizzard Avalanche is still good. Even Dazzling Gleam Aurora Veil is solid as a kind of support attacker, but I think it's just sort of, it's fine. It's like middle of the road fine. Pikachu, I'm moving up into our A+ tier. I think people have been sleeping on Pika for a while. This Unite move change is so good. So Pikachu's Unite move used to hit every opponent around it when you first cast it, and then one opponent around you as it continued. Now it's two. Plus they've buffed Volt Tackle, plus a couple patches ago they buffed Thunderbolt. Like, Pikachu is kind of crushing it right now. I think it's doing great. Gardevoir, A tier. Very, very fair. Strong special attacker. You got to play it at range, but its Unite moves on a really low cooldown, and it's very powerful. Same thing with Espeon. I think Espeon hangs out in the A tier as well. I think Espeon, like, for whatever it's worth, I'm not really ranking these in their tiers, but I think Espeon is a little bit better than Venusaur and Guardy. However, it's just because it gets its Unite move at 8 and it gets online faster, right? Outside of that, I think they're all very, very potent. Delphox for me is A+. I think Fire Spin is dummy broken. It's so annoying. It's so difficult to deal with. A good like when you think of support attackers right now, it's interesting because we're looking at 3 kind of support attackers in the A+ tier. Sylveon is sort of a support attacker. Pikachu, definitely a support attacker. And Delphox, definitely a support attacker. What I mean by this is not only are they playing their role as an attacker and doing damage at range, but they are also doing things that are messing with your opponents, whether that be hitting them with, you know, curse damage, stunning them, slowing them, things like that, stopping them entirely with Volt Tackle in certain situations. So support attacker is doing pretty well. Glaceon, I think Glaceon is probably A. I think after it got nerfed a little while back, people have sort of run away from it a little, but it's still an A tier choice. It's just not as broken as it used to be, so I think people are having a hard time with it. Mew, I would say, is probably S tier. The thing about Mew is it's you are going to find less Mews doing as well as all of the Pokemon in the A+ tier and probably all the Pokemon in the A tier. And it's just because it requires so much skill to play. But when you see a really high skill Mew, it's amazing. Maybe for that, just because I could see an argument to put it in the A+ tier, just because, again, you're really not seeing many players play this at a high level. But if it is played at a high level, I think it's very, very good. Candle. I think Candle hangs out in the A tier here as well. Really strong. Imprison's pretty powerful. Flamethrower's great. You get a little extra healing now if you want to run Shell Bell on it, but you probably don't want to with Candle. It feels like Candle's more of a choice specs curse item Pokemon. Inteleon for me is A+. It's close to S, especially after they buffed Liquidation. Like, there's really not anything bad on this kit anymore. And then Mewtwo-Y, this is a Pokemon I get into an argument with a lot of people about. Mewtwo-Y is still an A+ choice for me, absolutely. I moved it out of the S tier, and that might even be, like, unfair to it. I think the thing people don't realize with Mewtwo is it went from being something that you could just be, like, fully checked out and be winning matches with. Now you just have to play it with positioning, but this thing is still so incredibly powerful. I think people just don't recognize it because Mewtwo-Y players are... Well, let's see where we're going next. Where do we want to go? Let's move on to let's talk about speedsters. Speedsters are an interesting role right now. They're all doing pretty well, with one who just recently got a huge buff. We've got Meowscarada. I think Meowscarada is probably an A tier choice for me. Let's just bring our speedsters out while I'm talking about it. I think Meowscarada is probably an A tier choice. Really strong. Undervalued, I think, by a lot of people. I think one of its builds is just a little more complex than people like to play, but if you know how to play it, you actually get extreme value out of it. This is kind of true of all speedsters, right? The thing about speedsters are they're kind of high risk, high reward, and if you are able to play well with them and outplay your opponents, they all actually provide great value. Even when Gengar was at the bottom of our tier list, I would make the mention every single time, like, look, if you're a killer Gengar and you're playing in solo and you get a level lead on your opponents, you're going to absolutely rip them apart, right? I think A is very fair for Meowscarada. Honestly, I think Gengar is probably A+. This thing got one of the biggest glow ups. It might even be close to S. I've played a decent amount with it. I think it's very strong. I think it still has a few issues that keep it out of the S tier for me. Like, it can still be punished near opponents. It's pretty dang telegraphed, but it's in such a better position right now. I'm going to put it A+ here, but I would love to hear from you in the comments if you think it's even higher. Scyther. I think Scyther is good, not great, but again, it's just like Speedster broken. So are you broken on Scyther? You're going to have some great games with it. I'd probably put Scyther in the B tier. I think it could use a slight tuning, but again, with any of these speedsters, just like we saw with Gengar, a little like click, click, click up of the power level on these things, they become really strong. Talon, I'm going to keep A. I think Talon's doing pretty well in the meta right now. It's gotten multiple buffs in recent memory, so I think it's doing pretty solid. Zeraora, I'm moving to B. Good, kind of a good, like, explosive carry Pokemon, but still it feels like it lags behind a lot of the other speedsters. Leafeon, I would say, is A+. Zoroark, I would say, is A+. Dodrio, I would say, is A+. And then Absol, I'd probably keep A. Absol might even be moving up into the A+ category. Again, the fact of the matter is, these are all, in different ways, high skill Pokemon that provide tons of value if you get a strong level lead and you know how to put pressure on your opponents. If you don't know how to play Zoroark, it's D tier. If you really know how to play Zoroark, it's S tier. And a lot of speedsters kind of fall into this. It's just the nature of their role. But in general, like, looking at them, I feel like Gengar, Leafeon, Zoroark, and Dodrio, probably like the highest rung. Meow, Talon, Absol, right below them. And I still think Scyther, Zoroark, no, I was right, Zeraora. The names are quite close, you got to admit. Scyther, Zeraora, I think are solid picks, especially with skill, but they lag behind a little bit the rest of the speedsters, in my opinion. Okay, let's see. Let's do our supporters. Why not? Now again, this is going to be sort of apparent when you see kind of like where I'm putting supporters, and you would go, wait, Wiggly's not better than Scyther or something like that. As a supporter, I would say it is, but yes, at like 1-to-1, a player with a Scyther is getting more value, right? Again, I'm comparing apples to apples here. So we're talking about sort of tanks when we're talking about Wiggly. I think Wiggly's pretty solid. It has a great cleanse with its Unite move that can actually counter Ceruledge, which is the top meta pick right now. It also is just really mean in lane. I think it's a really strong tank. Mr. Mime is right there with it. Mr. Mime might even be A+. I think Mr. Mime is great. It's like every build on it's really strong right now. Confusion barrier, confusion. Yeah, I guess you don't see as much confusion power swap, but you'll see like psychic power swap. I think these are really strong builds. It's a really strong tank. It has a great Unite move. The amount of disruption you get out of that Unite and the way it can swing team fights is pretty huge. I think Mime's crushing it right now. We'll talk more about tanks when we get to the defenders. Let's talk about some of the other supporters. Eldegoss, I think, is A+. Great at range, great healing, just a super solid little puffball that really is never bad. Blissey, I also think, is probably A+. Great healing, single target Unite move that saves team fights. Excellent. Hoopa in coordinated is probably A+. Outside of coordinated, I'd say it's probably closer to A. I always go back and forth with this one. It's not that it's bad, it's just that outside of a full 5 stack, you can't get full value out of this thing. So while I do think it's good, I also think LD and Blissey in most play, I think, provide a little more value than Hoopa does. However, the more coordinated you get, and the better you are with Hoopa, because it's probably the highest skill supporter, the more like coordinated you get, and the better you are with Hoopa, the better this Pokemon performs. But it's really, like, all the supporters are really good. Comfey, probably A tier. So dumb. This is a Pokemon where the worse you are, the better it is. And if you're really good, it's really good. It's actually like the dumbest Pokemon they've ever released, and it kind of breaks the game. But in the hands of most players, it's fine. I would just, the thing is, the less coordinated your teams are, like if your teams are like just both teams have a duo on it, the duo with Comfey will win like 80% of the games with barely trying. So in that sense, it's kind of like A+. But in other situations, I think it's just a really, really solid supporter pick. Clefable, I think, is A tier. Really good. I think it gets outshined a little bit by LD and Blissey, but I think its healing is really phenomenal. You're going to see this Pokemon's value go up and down depending on how your enemy team plays around with curse items, and then how bulky your team is. The bulkier your team is, the better Clefable is, because you are able to sustain them in fights longer, and they have a big enough HP pool and large enough defenses to actually play around you for quite some time. If your team is really squishy, yeah. Sableye. Sableye is weird. And this is a Pokemon I always have a really hard time to place on a tier list. I actually think Sableye is quite good. It's just one of the worst played Pokemon in the game. It actually takes a lot of skill, and it takes a lot of knowledge from your team. Like, let's say I have a Sableye on my team. I have to know how a Sableye plays, and then they have to play like in a way that helps the team. Some Sableye players will just run around back cap, get a few hundred points, will lose the game, and then they'll be like, whatever, I scored 291 points. Yeah, it didn't matter because we can't win a fight. However, if a Sableye not only scores those points, but also is present in fights, stunning opponents and setting up big plays, and then you as a player on their team are able to pick up on that, this thing is a thing of beauty. Much better in coordinated play than solo play. I think the highest I can really put it is B tier. In general, yeah, this thing is just such a mess. It's such a mess to place on a tier list, because if I'm talking about the best Sableye player in the world, it's probably S tier. If I'm talking about most Sableye players in the world, it's probably D tier. So it's just a really tough one. Let's move on to we were just talking about defenders. We can talk about defenders here. Let's get them up. I'm just gonna start setting them here in my C tier. As you can see, I don't think a lot of Pokemon in the game are very bad at all. I think the game is in a really strong meta. It's one of the better metas that we've been in. Like, this year has had pretty good metas. Outside of like Miraidon release, we've had really good metas throughout the year. Okay. So, in general, just like supporters, defenders are crazy good. Not having one on your team is so detrimental, it's insane. So you're definitely going to want to have a defender. Where do we want to start? Let's start with Pokemon that I feel like our first S tier Pokemon for me is going to be Umbreon. I think Umbreon is crazy. And I can't believe they didn't nerf this thing. Like, they nerfed Slowbro, but they didn't nerf Umbreon. Umbreon, I think, is just one of the best things going in the game right now. Whether you play it sort of tanky, whether you like tank stun, like a stun tank with Snarl, or you play it like Wish. I just think this thing is so good. Its Unite move is so good. Slowbro was S tier for me, but they have nerfed its like HP and things like that, and its cooldowns. This is probably A+. It might even have dropped maybe down to the A tier. I still think it's a really good defender, but they actually kind of, yeah, they decided to nerf some of the defenders, and the ones they picked were Slowbro and Ho-Oh. We'll talk about Ho-Oh in a bit. Crustle, I'd say Crustle is probably A+. It's really, really good. The only thing it runs into are annoying situations with Umbreon stealing its shields, or it can kind of get zoned out in a weird way if your opponents are playing really like at incredible range and they just keep raining damage down upon you. But in general, I think it's a great defender. Snorlax is probably like B or A. Snorlax to me is just the stereotypical, like the most basic tank you'll find in the game. It's by no means bad. I think it's all around pretty good. There are a lot of defenders I'd rather have, so yeah, I'll put it in the B tier. Blastoise will probably hang out in the D tier for me. It's either D or C. Look, D tier might be too much of a gap. It's not awful. It's not useless, but man, it feels like we've really missed. We've really not had Blastoise around much at all lately. It's just been getting completely outclassed. Mamo doing really well, especially with how many players kind of saw what it could do at the World Championships, and they're now starting to play Mamo accordingly. I think it's a really, really solid defender, very strong. We've got Greedent, and it's right there with Sableye for me. I'm going to set it right next to Sableye. Greedent is good. It's just not a defender. It's a different role. I talk about this too much, but it's like these are harassers, and they play so differently. They change the dynamic of a match. I would imagine they're really hard to balance, and I don't know what to say about them. If you only have a Greedent on your team as a defender, your life is miserable. Trevenant's S for me. I think Trevenant's one of the best Pokemon in the game. It's so strong. I think it's a cut above the rest as a defender. The only thing I think is better than it is Umbreon. Trev is just tanky, great stuns, a Unite move that kind of keeps you around forever, a passive that keeps you around forever, the ability to move your opponents, the ability, like, you could play it as an all-rounder, basically. Like, Trevenant's nuts. Goodra's fine. Goodra's, like, into bad players, it's probably A, and into good players, it's probably B or C. It's, like, it's fine. It never seems to be winning, you know? It can't seem to break out of, like, the Pokemon that just doesn't provide enough value to the team. It's pretty good at chasing down some enemy carries, getting in the enemy's face. The problem is, the question is, does your team decide to fight Goodra the way Goodra wants to fight? If they do, Goodra does pretty well. If they don't, which is kind of easy not to, Goodra doesn't do that well. So it's okay. I mean, it's okay. Lapras. Lapras is not doing great. Lapras is I can't believe they haven't buffed Lapras. Like, Lapras and Blastoise to me, Goodra's in here a little bit, but it's a hard one to buff because it's already, like, crazy tanky and has crazy sustain. Lapras to me is just kind of criminally forgotten. I get that, you know, it was way too powerful at one point, like upon release especially. This thing was way too powerful, but at this point, like, Lapras is one of the more underwhelming defenders, and it plays in a way where you just think you can't act like this is comparable to Trevenant or something like that. You can't act like this is comparable to some of the top tier defenders. You can have good games with it, just like anything on the roster. There's not a single thing on the roster that you can't win with, but it really feels like they've forgotten about this. Ho-Oh is a weird one. They nerfed it, but it doesn't feel that nerfed to me. Like, I get it. I get they nerfed it. And the more coordinated, the more this thing is S tier. Oops, I accidentally put it in God tier. The less coordinated, the less this thing is S tier. I will move it down into the A+ tier, but that might not even be right. I gotta be honest. Like, its Unite move is still busted. It's kind of insane. I'm moving it down a little bit, but yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I still think it's very, very nuts. Oh, I found an attacker I missed. I knew I missed something. I found an attacker I missed, everybody. Miraidon. I think Miraidon is S tier. I don't think they nerfed Miraidon enough. It's either like high A plus or S tier. I think Electro Drift is probably still S, and I actually think Charge Beam Thunder is better than a lot of people think it is. It's just Miraidon was completely broken upon release, and they nerfed it a little bit. I think it's probably one of the best attackers in the game. If I had to move it down to the A plus tier, I wouldn't argue too much. I get it. But I do think Electro Drift is still kind of like, it's dumb. It's just nobody plays it because I think for whatever reason, people finally got a little like self-respect when it comes to picking some things that are just truly absurdly broken. This is like low S for me. Low S, high A plus. All right, let's move on to our all-rounders. I'm just going to start putting you guys out. Well, I guess it doesn't matter. That's the only thing we got left here. Get out of here, you jerks. Let's start with Charizard. I still think Charizard's an S tier Pokemon. And nothing changed since it got its massive buff to its Unite move. Incredible, incredible Pokemon. I'll put another one up here. Cerulege, even after the nerfs, I still think this is a top meta choice for an all-rounder. So good at 5. Crazy good Unite move. The outplays are insane. Yeah, I think Cerulege is doing great. Machamp is fine. I'm just going to put it in our C tier, not because you can't win with it ever, but because, like, things down here, all I'm really trying to say is, like, we forgot about these Pokemon, man. And they don't seem to be really doing much in the meta. So Machamp is fine. You can win games with it. Its Unite move can be powerful. It also just feels like we forgot about Machamp. Garchomp, I would say, is A tier. Solid all-rounder. Pretty powerful, especially after the change to Rapid Fire Scarf. And it's been doing good for a while. Like, its Dragon Claw combo into a Unite move is a delete button on a lot of Pokemon. Zarina might be kind of getting close to the S tier. I'm putting it A plus right here, and I would love to hear what you think in the comments, but I think Zarina's been doing really good for a long time, and now they made it even better that its Unite move can grab basically anything in the game. I don't know, man. This might even be low for Zarina. It might be an S tier all-rounder at this point. It's that was just a big change for it. Lucario's fine. Lucario to me is like, it's low A. It's not bad, but it is like outshined by a lot of the other all-rounders on the roster. We're just no longer in a Lucario meta. It's been a while since Lucario's been meta. Dragonite, I think, is pretty good. I would say it's like high A tier for me. Really strong. Both builds are good too. You get a lot of value out of Outrage depending on what your opponents are running, right? Like, it plays really well into some of these all-rounders. Like, I feel like it's great into Cerulege. It's really annoying to fight if you're, you know, a speedster or something like that. And then Hyper Beam is just incredible secure. Lots of damage at pretty solid range. I think Dragonite's doing pretty well. Aegislash is fine. Aegislash, in my opinion, is kind of in a need of a buff territory, especially Ironhead completely is just not good. But Aegislash is kind of like fine, and it probably needs a little tuning, and then it's like right up there with Zarina. Azumarill, same thing, pretty good. It's all right, pretty good early. Like, I would say really good early, actually, and it just I don't think it wins games enough, but I do think it's a really solid early all-rounder. I would kind of like them to maybe even lean more into that and see what that looks like. Buzzwole, I don't know, man. I don't know about Buzzwole. Hold on, I'm curious about something. What happened with Buzzwole with Leech Life? One of its builds is now at 50%. That's about what I thought. And SmackDown Leech Life is at 46%. Yeah, I don't know. Me personally, I did not think, I don't think the changes did much for it. I really don't. It's like not, it's better than people play it as, because a lot of the top players have walked away from Buzzwole, but I don't think these changes helped it that much. I think it's a little better, and this build is a little better. It's at 50% now, so it helped it a little bit. I think even B tier is like, this is fine. It is undervalued just from the superpower build still, but I don't know. Me personally, I need to spend more time with it. I want to play more of it. Maybe I'll play more of it today even, but I'm not impressed by the Leech Life change that much. T-Tar is fine. T-Tar is just like, it went from busted to not as busted. And the meta, I think, kind of changed around. Like, when you have a lot of special attackers and things that are kiting around Tyranitar, just kite it, it's worse and worse and worse. So I think it's probably a little underrated like Buzzwole, but I also don't think it's setting the world on fire. Scissor to me is the definition of a B tier Pokemon. It's not bad. It running into certain enemy comps, it's pretty dang good, and running into certain enemy comps, it's pretty dang bad. So it's not like whoa, yeah, we got Scissor. It's kind of like, okay. I feel like it's always okay. Urshifu, I would say we're probably looking at a reality where Dark Bear is A+. We might even be, considering Urshifu didn't get nerfed, I think we're probably looking at Water Bear being S right now. Given that Ceruledge and Blaziken both got nerfed, they're still great. And Urshifu got buffed a little while back and now not touched. We're probably moving towards Urshifu being S. Maybe it's closer to A+, but I think it's really, really strong. Zacian, I can't move below A+ currently. It was S. I think Zacian was the most slept on EX Pokemon. They did nerf it a little. I have to play it more. I don't think it's too bad, but we'll see. Maybe it's worse than I think. Mewtwo X also I think is really good. It's like A or A+. It's just hard for these things to be bad. They're nothing like they used to be. So if you're comparing it to what they used to be, it's D tier. If you're comparing it to the rest of the roster, it's like A+. Somewhere in there, I think is fair for the Mewtwo's. Blaziken, still S tier in my opinion. Yes, they have nerfed it. They have changed kind of part of its combination, but not enough. Like, this thing is still one of the best Pokemon in the game. Mimikyu, I would say, is A+. Kind of one of the higher A+ all-rounders, especially after the Trick Room buffs. Not that Trick Room is necessarily the play. It's just that they're making it so that there isn't a bad part of Mimikyu's kit. And that, I think, is just a really solid place for the Pokemon to be. Metagross, also a quality choice. I think Metagross is A+. Really strong. A little slept on, too. Doesn't take long to get good. Only needs level 5. And then it's brawling pretty much every Pokemon in the game. Crazy amounts to sustain. If you position yourself well, you'll eat tons of, moves in a big fight while still staying relatively healthy. So I think Meta's doing well. I think Gary is crushing it. Gary's still S. Like, Gary's doing really, really well. It's super easy to evolve. They kind of have taken like the fun out of the Magikarp portion of it. Not the fun out of it, but just there's not a lot of skill behind it. You don't have to do too much. It'll evolve, especially if you get an assist or, my goodness, if you get a KO early on this thing, the enemy's match is ruined. Great Unite move too. Still needs some love with Aqua Tail, but in general, Dragon Breath Bounce or even Dragon Breath Waterfall if the opponents don't have a lot of crowd control, really, really good. And now we have Phalanx. Phalanx, the only Pokemon I'm putting in the Decidueye Memorial tier. Phalanx has fallen off after the nerfs, and it now has a bug. I just found out about this. It now has a bug where it's taking more damage than it should when the troopers are all being hit. So because this is bugged and because they have not given it any love since they nerfed it, I have to move Phalanx into our Decidueye Memorial tier. It absolutely at least needs a bug fix to move to a C or B tier situation. And now it's time to pick a God tier Pokemon. So this is weird. I don't know who to put there for a few reasons. If I want to put the best Pokemon there, it's honestly probably still Blaziken. I think Blaziken's probably the best Pokemon in the game. A lot of the S tier is good. I think Ceruledge is still there. Char's still there. Gary's actually great. I think both of our defenders, and even Miraidon to an extent, could be there. Miraidon's probably the least exciting of our S tier choices. It's, again, closest to our A+ tier for me. But I'm going to put a Pokemon there that I don't even know is S right now. I just have to give a shout out to Gengar. In fact, for this week, it's not the God tier. It's just the Gengar tier. Gengar has been bad or underwhelming or irrelevant for so long. I don't know if these changes have really brought it up to an S tier choice. Hex feels kind of crazy right now, and even Dream Eater's getting some great play. I'm just excited for it to not be awful. Maybe it's too good. We're gonna find out throughout this season. but I have to give it up to Gengar. I have to give this like tier list to Gengar because it just really had an amazing glow up. Other Pokemon like Sylveon, Pikachu, like they really do hang out in this tier for like full on crushing it right now choices. And then other S tier ones, again, I think Blaziken, like if I were to give it to the Pokemon that I think is the best in the game, it's still Blaziken. Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, I would love to hear from you, whether you agree, disagree, totally cool. Just be cool to each other in the comments. I love the discourse, and we can have it without being like super negative or anything like that, right? I love you all. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and I will see you all next time. We did it. A tier list.